Have you ever wondered why we give tithes and offerings and where this practice originated from? Let's take a stroll down the ancient path of biblical history, where the inception of this tradition lies. In the early pages of the Old Testament, we find the roots of tithes and offerings. Tithes, which literally mean a tenth part, were a portion of one's income given as a form of worship and acknowledgement of God's provision. But these tithes were not just an act of worship, they served a very practical purpose too. Enter the Levites. The Levite priests, descendants of Levi, were a special group among the Israelites. They were set apart to perform religious services and to maintain the temple. Now, unlike the other tribes of Israel, the Levites didn't have a territorial inheritance. They didn't own lands or farms to sustain themselves. So, how were they to make ends meet? The answer lay in the tithes. As stated in the book of Joshua, chapter 13, verse 14, only to the tribe of Levi he had given no inheritance. The offerings made by fire to the Lord God of Israel are their inheritance, as he said to them. The tithes given by the rest of Israel were the Levite priests' inheritance, their means of sustenance. But it wasn't just about receiving. The Levites, in turn, offered a tenth of these tithes to the Lord, according to Numbers chapter 18, verse 24. This circle of giving and receiving created a support system, a network binding the community together, with the temple service at its heart. Tithes and offerings, then, were more than just religious rituals. They were a tangible expression of support, a way of ensuring that those who served in the temple, the Levite priests, could continue their important work without the worry of daily bread. So, from the beginning, tithes and offerings were a means of supporting those who served in the temple, the Levite priests. As the concept of tithes and offerings evolved, who else became beneficiaries of these contributions? Let's delve deeper into this fascinating aspect of biblical history. We all know that the Levite priests were the primary recipients of tithes and offerings, as stated in Numbers 18:24. But did you know that the scope of beneficiaries was expanded over time? The Bible, in its wisdom and foresight, ensured that these contributions would also reach those who needed it most. Let's turn to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 26, verse 12. It provides an intriguing perspective on this topic. The verse states, "When you have finished setting aside a tenth of all your produce in the third year, the year of the tithe, you shall give it to the Levite, the foreigner, the fatherless and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied." This verse reveals an essential aspect of tithes and offerings. Every third year, a portion of the tithes was also devoted to the foreigners, the fatherless and the widows. This was not a random act, but a conscious decision to ensure that the less fortunate in society were taken care of. It was a way of providing for those who had no means of providing for themselves. It's interesting to note that this expansion of beneficiaries was not just an act of charity. It was a commandment, a divine directive to make sure that everyone in the community had their basic needs met. It was a practical demonstration of love and compassion, values that are at the heart of the Christian faith. So you see, the concept of tithes and offerings was not limited to the financial support of the Levite priests. It was also a mechanism for social support, a way to uplift the less fortunate and ensure that no one was left behind. Tithes and offerings thus served a dual purpose, supporting the religious leaders and assisting the socially disadvantaged. These contributions were not just about religious obligation, they were also about social responsibility. This understanding can offer us a fresh perspective on the role and significance of tithes and offerings in our lives today. What then is the truth about tithes and offerings in our modern context? Let's dive straight into the scriptures. In Numbers 18:24, we read that the tithes of the Israelites were given to the Levites as an inheritance. Why? Because they had no land of their own. The Lord said, "I am your share and your inheritance among the Israelites." And in Deuteronomy 18:1, we see a similar theme where the Levite priests, who had no portion or inheritance with Israel, were to live on the offerings made by fire to the Lord. This was, in essence, their livelihood. Their service to the Israelites in the tabernacle of the congregation was rewarded with these tithes and offerings. Now, fast forward to today, the context has changed quite significantly. Religious leaders often have other means of sustenance. They might have a regular job, own property, or receive a stipend from the church. So, does this mean tithing is obsolete? Not quite. You see, the spirit of tithing and offering has been replaced with the spirit of giving freely, and is not about the amount or even about providing for the physical needs of religious leaders. It's about the heart of giving. It's about willingly supporting the work of the church, helping it to thrive and reach more people. It's about standing in solidarity with the less fortunate, just as the tithes in the Old Testament supported the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows, as told in Deuteronomy 26:12. New Testament is an act of faith, an acknowledgement that everything we have is a gift from above. It's a way of giving back, of saying thank you, and of participating in the work of the kingdom. So what is the truth about tithes and offerings? It's not about obligation or an antiquated law. It's about generosity. It's about support. It's about love for our community. It's about giving freely and generously to further the gospel of Jesus Christ and to help those in need.